All right, today's lesson is going to be about the story of the Declaration of Independence. Or another way that we can talk about this is how a group of old white men wrote the greatest breakup letter of all time. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. This is the greatest breakup letter of all time, and I will show you why as we go through. But the first old man that we need to talk about is Richard Henry Lee. Now, this guy recommended breaking up with the British in June of 1776. You guys know all the events that we've been covering to lead up to this point. So in June of 1776, Richard Henry Lee recommends breaking up with the British. But many colonists still liked the British, and they weren't ready to call it off. They weren't ready to break up. So Lee's solution to this, Lee's resolution, was that these united colonies are free and independent states. All political connections between them ought to be totally dissolved. How we'd probably say this today is just say we're grown men, and our relationship with Britain should be ended permanently, right? Did the resolution pass? No. Unfortunately not. But Congress, just in case, decided to create a committee to draft a document of independence. And then they were going to meet later that month to revisit it again. Maybe we'd come around to the idea of breaking it off with Great Britain by that point. All right, this is the room that all these debates happen in. This room is still there today. This is a modern photo. And you know that because it's in color, right? The Committee of Five that they designated to write the Declaration of Independence started with Benjamin Franklin. All right? Social media profile. You know Benjamin Franklin. We talked about him from the colonial era. He's a writer and inventor, the discoverer of electricity, not the inventor of electricity. Didn't invent it, it already existed. He's also, as you know, a professional prankster and a very smart individual, leader of the Enlightenment. John Adams is a lawyer, a patriot. You know him as well. He was the one that defended the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre. So we know John Adams as well. Richard Sherman we have not yet met. In his early life, he was a shoemaker, became a lawyer, and he signed all the things. He was the only person to sign all four founding documents over a span of about 20 years. So we'll be talking more about him. One of the two most important Shermans in American history, but that's a conversation for another time. Robert Livingston was a recorder, the first chancellor of the state of New York, of which he was immensely proud, and he was so proud of himself that he coined his own name, the Chancellor, which everyone called him for the rest of his life. Thomas Jefferson is our final writer, our final collaborator for the Declaration of Independence. He was only 23 at the time, guys, 23, and he's going to be the primary person writing the founding document of the United States. Right? He's a lawyer, a writer, calligrapher. Calligrapher means he had beautiful handwriting. Beautiful handwriting. All right. He's a plantation owner, and he is the ultimate nerd. There was no topic or subject that Jefferson was not interested in, and he is the type of person that would sit across from you no matter what your background or what your area of expertise was, and he would just be fascinated to listen and learn whatever he could. All right, so this is Jefferson. He will also, just like Adams, just like Washington, be a future president of the United States. Jefferson spent 17 days writing the founding document of our country. This is the building called the Graff House in Pennsylvania where he wrote it. This is the room where he sat with his draft of the Declaration with Franklin, Sherman, Livingston, and Adams, and they went over this document to try and correct it, try and make it perfect, right? And this is the desk on which he wrote it, this travel desk, which we still have today. It's actually in the Smithsonian because he sent it to a relative of his. He had had one of his slaves carve a very personalized, very ornate wood oak desk, and he had sent it via ship, and the ship had sunk, and his slave was unable to carve another one. He was too old by that point, and so Jefferson sent this desk with a little letter. It said, this may or may not be valuable, but here's the desk on which I wrote the Declaration of Independence. And he sent it, and that's why we still have it today. Now, just in case, I know you guys don't like the idea of writing drafts. We've talked about this before. But this is Jefferson's draft, and just like you guys, he had to correct it after he wrote it the first time. And there are actually several versions of him with different lines crossed out and things written in, because it was a process. All right? Jefferson met with Adams and Franklin. They drafted multiple drafts, edited, re-edited. This process takes time, right? And they're finally done on June 28th, 1776. They present the Declaration. They're so proud, right? They've spent 17 days writing this document. They've perfected it, and they present it to everyone else. And everyone else votes on it. And you know what? They vote to separate. Do you want to break up with England? Yes, we do. And they vote on it on July 2nd. And John Adams is so excited that he writes home to his wife and he says, the 2nd day of July 1776 will be the most memorable in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of the continent to the other from this time forward forevermore. Guys, July 2nd, officially, we had Independence Day, right? Except that's the wrong date, as we know. And the reason why John Adams had it wrong was because he assumed the day they voted to separate from England was the day we would celebrate, and it is not. It is July 4th. That is the day that an edited version of the Declaration was voted on. Now, you guys have all done projects and papers of which you've spent time on, you've spent hours on, days on. Can you imagine if you brought one of those papers or projects into class and we spent 2 days and all we did in class was pick it apart, nitpicked it, said everything that was wrong with it, and you were just sitting there. You just had to sit there and listen to everyone say everything that was wrong about what you had done. Well, Jefferson had to do that. These 2 days, from July 2nd to July 4th, that's all they did. They nitpicked this document. And he turned around to Franklin and he said, they have butchered my perfect document, my perfect declaration. But all of Congress had to vote on it. They all had to approve it. And ultimately they did. They had this final edited version. They approve it and they start to sign. It is actually only signed by a few people. The rest of the delegates that don't sign it in that initial day or a couple days, sign it in August, over a month later. So it's not even all initially signed on that day. But you all know John Hancock and that huge signature, which is very famous. This is what the Declaration of Independence looks like today. Here is John Hancock's signature, which is very, very faded. It is incredibly difficult to read this document because it has gone through a lot. Right? When the revolution happens and things might not be going so well in Philadelphia, some of the founders have to take this document and run away through Pennsylvania through that hot, humid summer. This document, we didn't have modern storage of documents, and so it's going to fade and be worn over time. But we do still have it, and it's in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. today. All right, so now, I've teased this enough for you guys over the last few weeks. You know that tomorrow we're going to be writing our breakup letters, and in order to do that, we have to know the structure of the Declaration of Independence and how it works. I told you that Jefferson's Declaration is the greatest of all time, and this is how he structured it. All right, section 1 is the purpose. This is where you declare why you are writing this thing. Jefferson says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them, they should declare the causes of separation which impel them to the separation. So basically, when you're going to break up with someone, you should say why. You should declare the cause. All right, that's all you're doing with this purpose. What is the cause? Why are you writing this? The second section is the statement of rights. So this is where you declare the rights that you have. For Jefferson and the colonists, they said, we declare these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were 3 rights that these are rights we have, right? These are obvious things. We know these are true. You guys, when you write your breakup letters, will also have to declare your rights. What kind of rights do you have in an ideal relationship? Third section is the list of grievances. This is the fun part. This is where the colonists list out complaints against the British. They blame King George for a whole bunch of stuff. All right, and this is how they lead it off. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Basically saying King George has refused to approve different laws that would have been good for everyone. All right, would have been necessary for everyone. And he's just refused to do this. He's mean and he's stubborn. Now, this is, again, where you get to list out all the complaints that you're going to have in your breakup letter. As they did this, understand this was the biggest part of the entire document. All right, probably about 75-80% of our declaration is complaints against King George. So make sure you have multiple complaints. Make sure that you're going to write them out. Now, fourth section, efforts at reconciliation. The colonists explain what they've done to fix the relationship. What have you done? They said at every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. In the most humble terms, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. Every time we've tried to fix it, they just hurt us more. The final section is the conclusion. Colonists conclude with a statement of independence. This is the final declaration. We therefore solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. So now we have the final declaration. You have to have this at the end of your breakup letter, right? You have to declare the breakup, otherwise it's not official. So what I want you to do tonight, when you come in tomorrow, I want you to have an idea in your head. Who are you going to break up with using Jefferson's format?